I never would have expected a Christmas sale to cause problems for Call of Duty, but with the generative AI debate raging across the industry, Microsoft execs meddling with Activision's business plans, and Game Pass being more expensive than ever, I think this actually could mark the beginning of the end for the franchise. I know it sounds weird, but all of these things are connected. In order to get to the bottom of this, we're gonna have to cross-examine a ton of reporting from across the games industry, so make sure you're comfortable and we'll get started. The story begins on January 18th, 2022, when Microsoft announced their plan to acquire Activision Blizzard. It would take nearly 2 full years for this deal to go through, and eventually it would do on Friday, October the 13th, 2023. The COD coming out that year was Modern Warfare 3, and it was only a month after the acquisition was finalized, so it didn't really have enough time to have any Microsoft influence. But that changed the following year with the release of Call of Duty Black Ops 6, as it was the first mainline Call of Duty to ever release on Game Pass day one. The launch of Black Ops 6 went very well for both Activision and now for Microsoft as well. And if we look at Circana data, which gives us an insight into sales figures across the games industry, we can see this represented in hard numbers. For example, considering all of the time that the PS5 has been around, if we look at the top 10 best-selling PlayStation 5 games ever ranked on dollar sales, Black Ops 6 is number 1. That's a really big deal, especially for a game that launched towards the end of this reporting period. So obviously, Microsoft was pretty happy about this. However, the story would then change drastically the following year, when Black Ops 7 released back-to-back after Black Ops 6. For that launch, it sold 63% fewer copies compared with Battlefield 6, its main competitor that year, and it was also more than 60% down over the previous year's Black Ops 6, which on the one hand is maybe unsurprising given that Black Ops 6 was such an outperformer, but at the same time, nobody was really expecting Battlefield 6 to be able to uproot Call of Duty in this way, and yet it seems to have done so. This is reporting from Christopher Dring, who is editor-in-chief at The Game Business, and he also clarified and said there were more Call of Duty players in October, the month before Black Ops 7 came out, than there were in November when BO7 actually launched, which is a really bad look. So as you can imagine, Microsoft had something to say about this, seeing as they just spent $69 billion on Activision, and suddenly Activision was taking a nosedive in its biggest release of the year. Hope here reports that Microsoft believes BO7 is a good game, but the financial performance is below expectations, which were lowered last year after BO6 fell off a cliff. This is likely alluding to the fact that the sales at launch were extremely strong, but the post-launch season from more or less February onwards was extremely weak compared to the momentum that was seen at launch. Hope continues the report saying that with the state of the franchise overall, the pressure is now on Call of Duty to change its model. Microsoft wants to see Call of Duty overall move towards a smoother revenue stream and a reduced expenditure pattern, which is a very important line that we will come back to a little later in the video. Microsoft also supposedly told higher-ups within COD that changes are very much required and nothing is off the table, including studio mergers and a complete rethink of monetization models within the franchise. This is classic new owner behavior. You acquire a company and then you say, oh, actually, we're going to make a bunch of changes here to sort of stick our fingers in the pie, and either that will go very well, or it could go extremely badly. And there are further reports in this same area as well. So for example, Xbox's president of game studios says about Black Ops 7, shipping a major franchise like clockwork every year is a really difficult task, and I'm proud of what the team did to move the franchise forward. The interesting thing about COD is, I think as an IP, it's really well positioned to continue to deliver content for players going forward. The system of seasons. And I hate how sort of corporate this all sounds, but it's not just about the launch, it's kind of its own unique category and ability in terms of how the team keeps delivering content throughout the year. So we're real happy with where we've landed with that. And this, I think, comes to bolster the comments that Activision have made and Treyarch devs themselves have made to say that they intend for Call of Duty Black Ops 7 to carve out its place among the other Black Ops games and prove itself to the fan base, but to do so by releasing the most jammed jam-packed live service of seasonal updates that we've ever seen before. And this isn't just me making up quotes from the COD devs, this is from the Call of Duty team themselves. They posted this very weird apology on December 9th, which quite literally said, "We know for some of you, the franchise has not met your expectations fully." And that was just them basically saying, "We see the terrible sales are bad, but we are also committed to this unprecedented seasonal support," in line with what the director of Game Studios was saying. The problem now is that they have a game that's sold very badly, and they're also committed to trying to produce more content for it for free through the seasons than they ever have before, and franchise fatigue is hitting the COD community harder than it ever has. So what the hell is the plan for next year? Well, Hope has also reported that COD 2027, made by Sledgehammer, will be a new sub-franchise, so that's like Advanced Warfare, Infinite Warfare, Black Ops, etc. New sub-franchise with completely new characters set in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Rumored features also include Omni movement with no tac sprint, Pick 10 returning, and zombies is not planned for the game. So that seems to be what may be on the horizon, except for the fact that other Call of Duty outlets like Charlie and Tell have heard that that's not what's going to be going on, and actually they've heard something else entirely, which honestly could be a sign of the fact that internally at Sledgehammer, they're still a little unsure themselves as to exactly what's going to happen. So with this supposed rethink of the monetization models potentially on the way, and with Call of Duty underperforming so drastically compared to Battlefield 6, it would make sense for the devs to also look a little to the broader industry and see what's happening there. I personally have had conversations with Activision this year where they've asked me questions about their competitors. They've questioned me in a friendly way about what they're doing well and what Call of Duty might be able to learn from them. So I know these conversations are happening, and especially so when it's not just Battlefield, but it's also things like Arc Raiders eating into COD's market share. And even, according to Chris Dring, Fortnite The Simpsons is eating into it as well, which is such a funny thought that The Simpsons in Fortnite might be killing COD, but that's apparently the world we live in right now. Anyhow, this conversation and this question internally at Activision of what the rest of the industry is doing right is present. And I mentioned Arc Raiders a moment ago. That won Best Multiplayer at the Game Awards. We also saw Battlefield 6 winning Best Audio at the Game Awards. Call of Duty won 0 awards. But the game that won the most awards was Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It actually broke records, earning 9 awards at the Game Awards, which has never been done by a game before. But immediately after it won all these awards, it got embroiled in a whole new controversy, which does also deeply affect Call of Duty. So let's go on a little tangent here, but it will help illustrate this underlying real toxic problem that COD is going to be facing going forwards. So immediately after Clair Obscur won, amongst other things, Game of the Year, it was also up for nomination at the Indie Game Awards for Game of the Year, and it won. Except it then had its win revoked. So the way this all went down is the game, which is developed by Sandfall Interactive, was given the Game of the Year award, and when it was submitted for consideration for this award, a representative of Sandfall agreed no Gen AI, that's generative AI, was used in the development of the game. However, in this article from El País from July 2025, Jorge Mola spoke to some of the Clair Obscur developers, and one particular developer, Francois Maurice, said, "We use some AI, but not much." And Francois goes on to say, Unreal Engine 5's tools and assets have been very important in improving the graphics and the gameplay. When he mentions assets, he's referring to pre-built things, but that's pretty much the end of the statement here. But he then goes on to say that while the game has the look and feel of a blockbuster, it wasn't easy, but technology now means if you're clear about what you want to do, you can do it with minimal resources. This is key, we're going to come back to this. So they did use AI. They admitted that they did do it. But like I said, when they submitted the game for consideration, they said that they didn't use any. And so, from the perspective of the Indie Game Awards team, in light of their confirmation that they did use Gen AI art, which we'll talk about in just a second, this does disqualify Clair Obscur from its nomination. And so the winner has been re-chosen, and their new Game of the Year is Blueprints. And is this a 3D model account on Twitter that talks a lot about AI usage in games, and I think is a pretty good follow. I should probably actually follow them. They tweeted out this extra update that Sandfall provided, I believe, to El País. And in that update and clarification, they say, in their exchanges with El País, Sandfall indicated it used a limited number of pre-existing assets, notably 3D assets sourced from the Unreal Engine marketplace. None of these assets were created using artificial intelligence. So that just clarifies one element of that previous comment, that the Unreal stuff wasn't AI stuff. That was a bit of a misunderstanding. But when the first AI tools became available in 2022 during the game's development, some members of the team briefly experimented with them to generate temporary placeholder textures. Upon release, instances of a placeholder texture were removed within 5 days to be replaced with the correct textures that had always been intended for release. And this is backed up, for example, if we look at the Steam database, and this was posted by Dev, you can see 5 days after the release, which was the 24th of April 2025, they rolled out this patch, and one of the patch notes was that they replaced a placeholder texture with the correct visual asset. These are the textures in question. They're very clearly AI textures, and they were removed from the game very quickly after launch. So it's clear that this was a period of the games industry really grappling with this new onset of AI tooling, and some studios dabbling with it even in a minor way and then being disqualified for game nominations, while others thinking, actually, this is necessary to make games cheaper and become more easily proliferated to the masses without needing to be Activision or Microsoft or Sony or some massive publisher. The challenge, though, is when self-policing these sorts of issues, the games community also makes a ton of mistakes. So I mentioned, for example, that Blue Prince was then awarded Game of the Year by the IGA team, but then Escapist came out and they said, Blue Prince also used AI, so who cares? They say, ironically, Blue Prince used generative AI for its art assets as well, including small stuff like various background pieces, but it still used it. And the devs didn't even claim it was patched out, which means that it still has assets in the final product when it was being judged by the performative and self-righteous Indie Game Awards. Now, the irony of this is that it's not true. The Raw Fury and Dogubomb team came out and said, there's no AI in Blue Prince. Like, what are you guys yapping about? You're just making stuff up. And Olivia Richman and Lloyd Coombs from Escapist then had to come back and say, we're really sorry, we were just wrong about this. They go on to say, we wholeheartedly apologize for the inconvenience caused by this error, and the classic, we'll ensure our editorial processes are adjusted in light of this to ensure we improve in the future. Yeah, right. It's hilarious that they called the Indie Game Awards performative and self-righteous, and then they went on to make this error. But still, it's just emblematic of this challenge that the game industry faces, where it's trying to promote the right behavior that it wants, but it's so difficult to do so because it's such a nuanced topic. And we've seen this with other game studios as well. Baldur's Gate 3 has been under fire after Sven Vinke's comments about their usage of AI, first saying that they were using it to do tasks that nobody wants to do, but then saying that they were using it to help with sort of establishing some initial reference ideas before they would then go to their concept art teams and have things made by those artists. But there's been a huge amount of backlash about his comments there as well. Then on the other side of things, we've got places like CD Projekt Red, beloved game developers, saying, we don't think that AI will ever reduce headcount, but the benefits are real and they're meaningful. And so Kelsky here comes out and says, it's yet another studio admitting that they've been using AI, and your favorite game studio is likely using it, and you probably will never know. And I suspect that part of the reason that Kelsky is talking about this is that Kelsky's main game, at least that I see them talking about, is Arc Raiders, which also has AI voice lines in the game. Similarly, another games industry beloved figure, Hideo Kojima. He's said, I think there's no point saying we shouldn't use AI or AI is useless. We can't go back. Smartphones were the same. And while he still worries about the effect it has on human connection, because it's Kojima, of course he's worried about that, and he says things like, we might have to have days where we don't use it, he still, big picture, thinks that it is absolutely inevitable at this point. So how exactly does all of this relate back to Call of Duty and its Christmas sale problem? Well, if we look at Black Ops 6, one of the areas where that game came heavily under fire was its usage of generative AI. I covered this extensively on my channel, but there's a great little wrap-up here from Wesley Yinpool over at IGN. And much of the controversy began with this loading screen in the game, which features a zombified Santa, And if you count how many fingers Santa has, something doesn't add up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there was so much copium around this at the time, with some people saying, for example, oh, that's Santa's pinky finger, and then this is actually just like flesh that's like been ripped off or something. No, it very quickly became apparent that was not the case because we saw so much more of it in the game. Look at these teeth. Look at the number of fingers on this hand. It was over and over again. There were very clearly AI-generated assets all over Black Ops 6. This was extra controversial because Steam actually requires its developers and its publishers to disclose when they're using AI. They put this post out in January 2024, which says, "We now require devs to fill in a content survey to specify what kind of AI they use, and Valve will use this disclosure on the Steam store page for your game so customers can understand how the game uses AI." The problem was that Call of Duty was just dodging this. They weren't mentioning AI at all, and clearly they had lied to Steam. Since then, this has now changed. So Black Ops 7, for example, if you scroll all the way down the page here, it says, "Our team uses generative AI tools to help develop some in-game assets." So they're at least admitting to it now. But this brings us back to the original core problem, and this is where the Christmas sale problem becomes apparent. We already saw that Microsoft is looking for Call of Duty to rethink its monetization model. We've seen Microsoft push for this in various areas of its business unit. For example, Game Pass is so much more expensive now, and Ultimate is $30 a month. Moreover, Xbox is doing things like canceling Xbox Wrapped 2025 because of marketing budget constraints for this current financial year. So it's clear that Microsoft is really trying to kind of pinch the pennies here where possible, and we've got an extremely poorly selling Call of Duty game, which a lot of people were only playing on Game Pass, and now they'll have probably let that Game Pass subscription lapse because they don't want to keep paying $30 a month when it's so much more expensive, and COD has committed to unprecedented support of that game that nobody is going to be playing. And we have new technology such as generative AI that can help you do this sort of stuff with minimal resources, but those very same tools are causing massive amounts of community controversy and seem to be a really strong turnoff for consumers to entertain the idea of buying a game or preaching about how much they love it to their friends if their friends are going to just say, well, that's just AI slop, bro, like you shouldn't be playing that. And it's made even more complicated by this. Microsoft Copilot. Yeah, obviously, Microsoft, being the mega corporation that they are, have their own enormous AI division, and just one of their products is Copilot. And so there's absolutely no world where Call of Duty says, oh yeah, we're going to take a stance against AI here, because by doing so, that would be taking a stance against their own parent company. And this is a parent company that says nothing is off the table. So you think they're going to do the moral thing and avoid AI? Hell no. What we're instead no doubt going to get is internally a ton of initiatives to try to leverage AI to make their development process smoother in whatever capacity that might take, whether it's Gen AI assets or whether it's just stuff in the production pipeline. And that brings us to the Call of Duty Christmas sale. Black Ops 7, as of December 13th in the build-up to Christmas 2025, was $35 at GameStop. This is more or less in line with what GameStop did last year for Black Ops 6, where that game was also deeply discounted, but the circumstances are just drastically different now. So in 2024, Game Pass Ultimate was $20, and Microsoft could use that cheap price point to incentivize people to join the Game Pass family and become customers in theory for life. Keep in mind, it was the first COD to ever be on the Game Pass at launch, so it was new, it was shiny, it was exciting. But what happened? What changed since then? Well, the Black Ops 6 post-launch support fell off a cliff, and Game Pass got so much more expensive. And so now, this BO7 sale means the base game is significantly discounted, so it's the end of that short window where COD can milk billions of dollars out of everyone at that $70 price point, but it simultaneously also makes Game Pass Pass look like a worse deal because 1 month of Game Pass is basically the same as the cost of the game, and people are already aware now of how poor the BO6 support was, and so they don't have faith in the idea of continuing to maintain the Game Pass membership in hopes that the post-launch support's better this time. It's just not going to happen. And I think the significance of how close these two things are in price can't be understated because there was so much backlash when they raised the price of Game Pass, and part of the justification for it could be, well, we've got premium titles, $70 titles available, so yeah, it makes sense to pay your $30. But if everyone is aware that those supposedly premium titles are going to be half price basically a month after launch, then there's going to be a lot fewer people rushing into those scenarios to buy them. And they're just going to see Game Pass as being full of cheap games that don't really actually have true value. And so I think all of these factors are compounding, and it's going to mean that the billion-dollar hole burning in Microsoft and Activision's pocket right now is one that could end up being fatal for this whole operation. And so this Microsoft decision to acquire Activision Blizzard when they did in 2022-3 is suddenly starting to look like they've acquired a company that needs to completely rethink its entire monetization model going forwards, because the current one is clearly faulty in a really deep way. But one of the paths forward that is going to seem most obvious to Microsoft is also the one that the games industry is going to detest the most and be most vocally critical of. It's a fork in the road that is going to be near impossible for them to navigate going forwards because Call of Duty simply cannot stand against its new owners, and its new owners are more budget-focused than ever before. I really, truly believe, as a long-term Call of Duty fan and someone that has covered it professionally for my own channel for 17 years, this is the most shaky ground Call of Duty has ever been standing on. And without some seriously genius chess moves over the next 12 to 24 months, I could see its place as kingpin of the shooter space being lost forever and somebody else stepping up to take its throne, whether it be Battlefield or whether it be another franchise entirely. We joked about Fortnite The Simpsons being a reason for part of its loss here, but for many Activision execs over Christmas 2025, I'm sure that this realization might be hitting a little too close to home. For continued reporting on this topic and seeing how it unfolds over the next several years, make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. And if you'd like to see more in-depth games industry news like this video, then please let me know in the comment section, because it's really down to you guys what I focus on in the twilight years of Call of Duty, now that perhaps that part of my channel's focus may have to come to an end if the game does end up dying. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this informative. I've tried to cover all the bases, and I'll see you very soon with more games industry news. Bye for now, folks.